Hi, thanks for tuning into my webinar. I'm Dolff Hanke, and this presentation is called Ops, I Did It Again. Sorry, I had to work a bad pun in here somewhere. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about building digital products around physical operations. On the agenda, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, more detail on the purpose of this talk, and then we'll get into some of the main takeaways. So, about me, Dolff Hanke. I'm a product manager at Etsy. Before that, I was a PM at jet.com/Walmart e-commerce, and I focus on fulfillment and e-commerce logistics. At jet.com, that was internal fulfillment. We had our own fulfillment centers. And at Etsy, it's our sellers that are doing the actual fulfillment, and I'm building the tools to help them do that. Purpose of this talk. I'm sure you guys have heard the phrase, software is eating the world. Digital products are becoming more intertwined with what's happening in the real world. And with that, we're getting dependencies on physical processes that bring about more complexity, more edge cases, and more workarounds for the products that you're building. The less insight and control you have over the ops, the harder it is to build around them. So today, I want to give you some tips and tricks around building products with these type of constraints. And I'll use some real life stories. On the fulfillment team at Etsy, we have experience building products that depend on physical ops. And when it comes to shipping, we know what it takes to build reliable, successful products, even when you don't have direct touch points with the people who are carrying out those operations. So I'll tell you some real stories about real features and real products where we applied these tips and tricks and how they benefited our products and ultimately our sellers and buyers. So shipping on Etsy. Here's the process end to end. A buyer from anywhere in the world purchases an item from a seller on Etsy. The seller receives that order and gets to work making the item. A lot of our sellers don't actually make these handcrafted custom items until they receive the order. After they finish with that, they pack up their item, they purchase a shipping label on Etsy, we hope, we don't force them to, and they give it to a shipping carrier. Carrier being someone like USPS if you're in the United States, or Royal Mail if you're in the United Kingdom. That carrier then ships the package to the buyer. This is what the carriers do, and they do it very well. Eventually, package gets to the buyer, they're overjoyed to receive their item, and hopefully they come back to Etsy for more purchases and leave that seller 5 stars for a great item. So in order to make that process work, we've developed some tips and tricks, and I'm going to give you 3 main takeaways that I hope help you in your own process. Those 3 takeaways are: 1, missing data is useful. 2, do real tests. Please, please do real tests. And 3, don't be afraid to remove features. Sometimes it's best to just cut something out. Main takeaway 1, missing data is useful. It's missing for a reason. Understanding what data you have and what data you don't can lead you to uncovering issues like inconsistencies in process, which, if you think about it, these are real people carrying out these operations. They're not going to behave the same way. Or 2, problems upstream that can sometimes be handled. These operators are usually pretty creative, but again, don't all think the same way. Or 3, that you have a real issue and it means your service potentially isn't viable for your product, or maybe there are just some use cases you need to reconsider. And if we're talking about missing data, I feel the need to highlight survivorship bias. The most famous example I can think of is World War II planes. And at this point, it might be a cliche, but bear with me for a minute. In World War II, a lot of planes were getting shot, naturally. And when they would come back, they'd be investigated by the military to try and uncover trends and better protect the planes. But they were only looking at the planes that came back. And those planes didn't get shot in the engines or the cockpit. So looking at just the data they had, they assumed, okay, we should protect everything except those areas, because those are obviously fine. But an outside firm came in and reminded them, some planes aren't coming back. And the ones that aren't are most likely the ones that are getting shot in the engines or cockpits. So it made sense to protect those areas more than the ones where a plane could get shot and still return. All right, let's get on to a more specific example at Etsy. I'm going to talk to you about first-class letters and flats. What the heck are those? This is a unique service that Etsy offers that allows sellers that ship letters or flats, like envelopes, instead of packages, like think more shoebox, that allows sellers to print trackable shipping labels at stamp-like prices. Basically, instead of shipping with the stamp, you can ship with a shipping label that will still have tracking. It's not going to be the exact same tracking as a package because packages get sorted in one way due to their size and envelopes get sorted another way. So the tracking is a little bit different, but we can finally offer that, which we believe is a great service for both our buyers and our sellers. So we tried to drive up adoption. And as we did, we noticed a lack of tracking events, particularly delivery events. And if tracking is going to be our main advantage, then we had to make sure it was working. So what we did, we investigated the data. We looked for trends across what was missing. Was there a specific geography where this wasn't working? West Coast, East Coast, something like that. Or was it a certain part of the process? Did we get 10 tracking events and then they all stopped? Or were some sellers having more success than others? Maybe it was about the type of item they were shipping. In parallel, we talked to our partners about this. We talked to the USPS directly who was shipping them, and Pitney Bowes, our partner and a longtime partner of USPS. And they gave us great insight. They gave us an indication that tracking should be over 90% successful, which is very different than what we were seeing. So it confirmed that we did have a problem. Working on these two in parallel, we figured it out. There was a lot of confusion around what qualified for the service. And the way we were driving adoption wasn't the most helpful. So that led us to understanding that the service works, but it's a very particular use case, and we needed to be careful about how we promoted it to our sellers. Main takeaway 2, do real tests. If this was Fight Club, this would be, don't talk about Fight Club. This is really the most important thing because there's no substitute for the real thing. Run actual physical tests that go through your entire process and try to do it while minimizing your uncontrolled variables and limiting the amount of mock data. It's very tempting when you're testing out a process to just do each individual step, take mock data on the way in that should look like real data, and then see if that piece works. But I really encourage you to go end to end. And this will take longer. So think about that when you're creating your project plan. Build in the time. And something that we do at Etsy is we try and find that critical path to testing. If this were DevOps, I think they refer to it as a walking skeleton. And when it comes to Etsy shipping, we know that purchasing a shipping label, giving it to the carrier, seeing tracking, and then getting invoice for it is our critical path. So we try to build out those pieces as basically as we can first to get it tested. Then while we're testing, we can keep building out the other features. And the last one, if you can't run the test yourself, it might not be possible. You might not have the materials, or you might not be in the right location. Be in contact with your users who will test it. At Etsy, since we're a global company, we're not always in a position where we can ship things from the country that we're testing something from. But we can partner with our customers or sometimes admin from Etsy to run those tests for us, and they can give us very direct feedback. Give you an example with package pickup. When the pandemic started and everyone was going into lockdown, we decided to launch a package pickup feature so that we could help sellers not have to leave their home. If they were already purchasing USPS labels on Etsy.com, they could have the USPS pick them up for them directly without ever having to leave their home. So once we built this, we wanted to make sure it worked. And how we tested that is we scheduled package pickups for a mix of package types and services from different locations on different days. So we'd have tubes, we'd have regular packages, and we'd have those envelopes that we talked about. This was an important one for us to test because this was a package-specific service. And with envelopes, usually you should leave them in your mailbox for a postal worker to come pick up. But we wanted to make it simpler for our sellers by having all of these packages and envelopes together. And we tested it from different locations on different days to see if there were differences in the postal workers who were picking them up, or if there were different routes on different days or even weekends. Luckily, since we were remote, we were all in different locations and we were able to get that variety. What we learned by doing this, most important piece, we learned that the service worked. Packages were picked up and processed as expected. It took the same amount of time to deliver them, and we never had any issues where a postal worker didn't come when they were supposed to. Second thing we learned, tracking starts when the postal worker scans a package. Sometimes it's right when they're picking it up from your front door. Sometimes it's later in the day back at the post office. We were fine with both of these scenarios, but it helped us understand the logic that we could build around that first pickup. And 3, letters and flats were picked up without any issue, which was great. We could offer the simple service that we wanted to and make it easier for sellers to understand. Another example of when testing was helpful was when we launched a return shipping label product on Etsy. This allowed buyers in the US to return their orders to sellers in the US. So we built out this product with a new shipping label type from USPS. It's a great offering. It allows you to print a shipping label without paying for it until it's used. Once we built that out, we ship packages with return shipping labels to each other. Myself, the engineers, designers, everyone on that team. And we did rounds of shipments until we were confident in the service. We looked at everything from delivery speed to tracking to invoicing. Invoicing was really important to us because we knew that the charge wasn't going to happen until after it was used. What we learned. Initially, we saw the invoicing, which we knew was important, wasn't working as expected. And we actually had to pivot services. We were using a new service from the USPS, and it wasn't quite where we needed it to be. So we pivoted to a service that we knew worked. And once we did that, we tested again. And what we learned from that one is that our invoices could come before or after delivery, meaning the way that we notified our sellers that they were charged had to be flexible enough to handle both situations. If something had already been delivered, we could encourage a seller to issue that refund. If it hadn't been delivered yet, we wanted to be careful not to be too forward with recommending they issue a refund right away. And the last one is that tracking and delivery speeds matched our expectations. They worked just like the services worked for forward shipping, and that was great news. Main takeaway number 3, don't be afraid to remove features. I know PMs don't love this, but sometimes it's the best way to go because your understanding will change. In product development and at Etsy, we talk a lot about hypothesis-driven development and experimentation. And oftentimes we think about this in terms of pure software, user-facing features, maybe highlighting conversion. But it should extend to offline processes too. Even though, and I know in shipping we have a lot of this, there may be a lot of upfront work with an integration, or maybe it takes weeks or months to measure the impact. But it's still, you should still be comfortable measuring and deciding if you want to keep something. A good way that we sometimes test the capabilities of a service is to experiment with how we drive adoption. And that allows us to check out each use case at a time. And ultimately, if you don't see the results you want, removing a feature or a use case might be the right move. So back to first-class letters and flats. Earlier, we talked about how we used missing data to investigate what was going on with letters and flats. And we realized that there was confusion around the service. And that was our fault. We were nudging sellers while they were purchasing labels to try this new service because we thought it could save them money while keeping tracking. But we overextended, we went too broad, and we were targeting all sellers that we thought had package dimensions that would work. But really, when we got down to it, we could be more specific about what item types or seller types we should be targeting. So what we did, we removed a blanket nudge statement encouraging sellers with smaller packages to ship flats. Unfortunately, this had been a very successful nudge and drove a lot of adoption, which we had celebrated earlier, but now had to communicate internally we were taking away because we were causing problems. It's not going to be the most fun conversation, but it's better to have it early. After that, after we removed it, we monitored the remaining letters and flats to see if tracking coverage increased. Were we seeing more events? Were we seeing more deliveries? We were. So we realized that taking that away from sellers who probably shouldn't be shipping with them was the right move. And then 3, we could go back, but we could use a more targeted approach. We could do experiments based on the type of product that is being shipped, and we could use tracking to create feedback loops and let sellers know if they were using this service correctly. So to sum it up, got those 3 main takeaways. Missing data is useful. It's missing for a reason. Do real tests. Please, please, please do real tests. And the last one is don't be afraid to remove features. Sometimes it's just better to cut it. And that's it. Thanks for tuning in. I hope there were some useful lessons and some good stories that will help you build better products in the future. Thanks.